On December 19, 1944, somewhere near the frozen crossroads of Bastogne, an exhausted American driver slammed a small olive-drab vehicle into second gear and pushed deeper into the darkness. Snow blew across the road like smoke. German artillery flashed in the distance. The forests were full of enemy patrols. Ahead, more than 10,000 American soldiers were surrounded, low on ammunition, and running out of medicine. The message in the driver's satchel had to reach them before dawn. No tank could move this fast. No truck could slip through roads this narrow. Only one machine had a chance. The American Jeep. It had no armor, no roof, no heater worth mentioning. A rifle bullet could tear through it. A mortar fragment could destroy it instantly. Yet on that freezing night, the fate of an entire division depended on 4 small wheels, a simple engine, and a machine so common that thousands of soldiers treated it like a trusted horse. To German generals watching the war unfold, this was deeply unsettling. The Americans possessed giant bombers, endless tanks, and oceans of ships. But again and again, the vehicle that appeared at the decisive moment was this tiny open truck. By the end of the war, several senior German officers admitted that the Jeep was one of the most effective American weapons ever built. Not because it fired the biggest gun, not because it was armored like a fortress, but because it made the entire American army faster, smarter, and harder to stop. To understand why experienced German commanders respected this little vehicle so much, you have to follow the Jeep into the moments when minutes meant survival and speed became more powerful than steel. The story began in the summer of 1940. Battle of France had shattered the armies of Western Europe in just 6 weeks. In Washington, D.C., officers in the United States Army studied every report with alarm. German armored columns had moved with terrifying speed. Tanks were important, but mobility at every level was proving decisive. American commanders realized they needed a new kind of vehicle, light, fast, reliable, and able to travel where ordinary cars and trucks failed. On July 11, 1940, the Army issued an urgent requirement. The vehicle had to weigh less than 1,300 pounds, carry 3 soldiers, mount a machine gun, and drive through mud, sand, and rough terrain. Manufacturers were given an almost impossible deadline. The small American Bantam Car Company was the first to respond. Engineer Carl Probst worked with extraordinary speed, sketching the design in just a few days. Bantam built the prototype known as the Burke. The Army liked it, but doubted Bantam could produce enough vehicles for war. 2 larger companies entered the competition, Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company. Willys offered the powerful Go Devil engine, producing about 60 horsepower, an impressive figure for such a small machine. Ford contributed manufacturing experience and standardization. The final production design, officially designated the Willys MB, combined the best features of all 3. No one in 1941 could fully imagine what they had created. The Jeep was brutally simple. It had 4-wheel drive, a 2-speed transfer case, high ground clearance, and a folding windshield. Mechanics could repair it with basic tools. Soldiers could push it out of mud. It started in heat, rain, and freezing cold. It climbed steep slopes and crossed streams. It could carry officers, machine guns, radios, stretchers, and ammunition. It could tow anti-tank guns and small trailers. Most important of all, it was available in astonishing numbers. By the end of the war, more than 640,000 Jeeps had been built. Factories in the United States turned them out at a pace Germany could scarcely match with much more complex vehicles. This was not just a car. It was mass-produced mobility. The Jeep reached nearly every theater of war. In North Africa, it bounced across deserts with dust covering every surface. In Italy, it climbed mountain roads under artillery fire. In France, it raced through hedgerows and ruined villages. In the Pacific War, it crawled over coral, jungle mud, and volcanic ash. Wherever American soldiers went, the Jeep followed. At first, German commanders did not pay much attention. Compared with the Panzer IV or Tiger I, the Jeep seemed insignificant. It was small, lightly built, and vulnerable. But war is not decided by appearance. It is decided by how quickly armies can see, decide, move, and respond. The Jeep transformed all four. In North Africa in 1942, Erwin Rommel faced British and American forces over enormous distances. Desert warfare rewarded speed and punished delay. Reconnaissance units had to move fast and report accurately. Artillery observers had to relocate constantly. Commanders had to visit frontline positions spread over miles of open ground. The Jeep excelled at all of it. American officers used Jeeps as mobile command posts. Radios were mounted in the rear, maps were spread across the hood. Decisions that once required slow truck convoys could now be made on the move. A colonel could inspect several battalions in one day and still return to headquarters before nightfall. German officers noticed. Rommel himself was famous for driving forward to inspect the front. He understood the military value of rapid movement better than almost any commander of the war. When he encountered American units whose commanders seemed to appear everywhere at once, the role of the Jeep was impossible to miss. The pattern repeated in Sicily and Italy in 1943. Narrow mountain roads and shattered bridges slowed heavy vehicles, yet Jeeps continued to carry forward observers, engineers, signal officers, and medics. In some sectors, they were the only practical way to move quickly between units. Wounded soldiers were loaded onto improvised stretchers. Wire crews hauled communication equipment. Officers reached threatened positions before small problems became disasters. This ability to save time was more important than many people realized. A tank battle might be decided in minutes. If artillery coordinates arrived late, the opportunity was lost. If an order was delayed, a regiment might attack the wrong hill. If medicine arrived too slowly, wounded men died. The Jeep reduced those delays across the entire battlefield. Then came June 6, 1944. As Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy during D-Day, thousands of Jeeps waited offshore in landing craft. Many were waterproofed so they could drive directly through shallow surf. Once ashore, they spread inland, carrying officers, engineers, radio operators, and military police. The fighting in Normandy was brutal. Thick hedgerows turned every field into a fortress. Roads were cratered, villages were reduced to rubble, yet the Jeep kept moving. It carried bazooka teams, ammunition, and field telephones. It towed 37 IMA anti-tank guns and trailers loaded with supplies. General Dwight D. Eisenhower reportedly listed the Jeep among the most vital tools of Allied victory, alongside the C-47 transport aircraft, the bazooka, and the atomic bomb. For Eisenhower, the reason was simple. The Jeep gave commanders unmatched flexibility. German units facing the Allied breakout in late July 1944 saw a new kind of warfare. American formations did not simply advance, they flowed. Headquarters shifted rapidly. Reconnaissance screens probed in every direction. Roadblocks were bypassed. Fresh orders arrived constantly. At the center of this motion were countless Jeeps. During Operation Cobra, Lieutenant General George S. Patton took command of the 3rd United States Army. Patton loved speed. He traveled frequently in a Jeep, often near the front, believing that momentum itself was a weapon. As Third Army exploded across France, Jeeps became the bloodstream of the offensive. They carried liaison officers between divisions. They delivered fuel requests, bridge reports, and intelligence summaries. Military police and jeeps redirected traffic through crowded intersections where hundreds of vehicles converged. Engineers raced ahead to inspect bridges before tanks arrived. The result was operational tempo that German commanders struggled to comprehend. A unit cut off in the morning could receive new orders by noon. Artillery observers could call fire within minutes. Commanders could exploit weak points before the enemy reorganized. German generals were trained to value maneuver. But by 1944, fuel shortages, damaged roads, and Allied air attacks limited their mobility. Many staff officers relied on larger, less flexible vehicles. Spare parts were scarce. Mechanical failures were common. The Americans, by contrast, seemed able to move almost effortlessly. Then came the winter of 1944. On December 16, Adolf Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. German forces smashed through thinly held American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg. Snow covered the roads. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Confusion spread. This was the crisis that revealed the Jeep at its absolute best. American headquarters had to react instantly. Divisions were redirected, road networks were reorganized, artillery was repositioned, medical units were moved under fire. In these critical first hours, jeeps raced in every direction carrying officers, radio operators, and urgent orders. One of the most dramatic examples involved the defense of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division and supporting units were rushed to hold the crossroads town. As German armor closed in, jeeps brought anti-tank ammunition, evacuation teams, and command staff to threatened sectors. Drivers often traveled at night with covered headlights, navigating icy roads under artillery bombardment. General Anthony McAuliffe depended on fast communication to coordinate the defense. With telephone lines cut and radio traffic overloaded, jeep couriers became essential. Their missions were simple to describe and deadly to execute. Reach the unit. Deliver the message. Return if possible. Many did not return. But enough got through to keep the defense organized until relief arrived. German officers observing Bastogne and the wider Ardennes campaign saw a familiar pattern. Even under extreme pressure, the Americans retained the ability to move information and people with remarkable speed. That mobility made their defenses resilient and their counterattacks swift. The Jeep also had a psychological effect on American soldiers. It represented connection. If a Jeep appeared, it might bring ammunition, hot food, orders, a medic, or news from headquarters. In isolated positions, the sound of its engine often meant help had arrived. For German troops, that same sound could mean the Americans were already adapting. The Jeep's uses seemed endless. Some mounted 30 or 50 caliber machine guns, others carried radio sets such as the Skur 610. Medics converted them into ambulances. Engineers packed them with explosives. Artillery observers used them to reach hilltops and direct devastating fire. In the Pacific, jeeps hauled supplies across islands like Guadalcanal and Okinawa. In the Soviet Union, thousands were supplied under Lend-Lease, where Red Army officers valued them for command and reconnaissance. This global reach reinforced what German generals increasingly understood. The Jeep was not important because of one spectacular battle. It was important because it was useful every day, in every climate, on every front. Its reliability was legendary. Soldiers often joked that it could run on almost anything and survive nearly anything. While this was an exaggeration, the Jeep's rugged design and standardized parts allowed quick field repairs. A damaged fender rarely mattered. A bent bumper did not stop the mission. German vehicles were often excellent designs, but many were mechanically complex and difficult to maintain under wartime conditions. The Jeep embraced the opposite philosophy: simple, durable, and easy to replace. This simplicity multiplied American effectiveness. A general's order was only useful if it reached the front. Artillery was only effective if observers could find targets quickly. Logistics only worked if staff officers could inspect routes and solve problems in person. The Jeep accelerated every one of these functions. That is why calling it a weapon was not an exaggeration. Weapons do not only destroy, they create advantages. The Jeep gave the United States an advantage in speed, communication, and command that influenced almost every battle. By 1945, Allied armies were crossing the Rhine and advancing into Germany itself. Jeeps rolled through shattered cities and crowded roads, still performing the same tasks they had carried out since 1941. They escorted generals, directed convoys, evacuated wounded civilians, and linked advancing units. To German commanders studying the collapse of their defenses, the lesson was unavoidable. American power did not depend only on heavy bombers or massed tanks. It depended on an extraordinary ability to coordinate huge forces over vast distances with speed and flexibility. The Jeep was the most visible symbol of that capability. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and other senior officers later reflected on the material superiority of the Allies. Their comments varied, but many acknowledged that American equipment combined practicality with enormous industrial output. The Jeep stood at the center of that reputation. It was cheap compared with tanks, easy to ship, quick to repair, adaptable to hundreds of roles, produced in numbers that seemed endless, and perhaps most importantly, it empowered individuals. A lieutenant with a Jeep and radio could influence artillery miles away. A medic with a Jeep could save lives in minutes. An engineer with a Jeep could inspect a bridge before an entire armored column arrived. A courier with a Jeep could carry the order that changed a battle. That is what happened near Bastogne in December 1944. Somewhere in the snow, an American driver pressed forward with a message that could not be delayed. The vehicle beneath him had no thick armor and no massive cannon. Yet it carried something just as powerful: time. Every minute it saved gave surrounded soldiers a better chance to survive. When historians list the iconic weapons of World War II, they often mention the M4 Sherman, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, and the P-51 Mustang. All were vital. But none were as universally present as the Jeep. It was there before the attack, during the battle, and after the victory. It carried the commander who made the decision, the scout who found the enemy, the medic who treated the wounded, and the messenger who brought hope. German generals understood something many people still overlook. War is not won only by the biggest gun. It is won by the army that can think faster, move faster, and recover faster than its opponent. The American Jeep did all three: small enough to ignore, tough enough to survive, common enough to be everywhere. That is why veteran German commanders, men who had commanded panzer armies across Europe and North Africa, looked at this simple, open vehicle and recognized its true significance. Not just a car, not just transportation, but one of the most effective weapons of the Second World War.